Many people don't realize that every time they over-explain a personal decision, they are unconsciously giving other people permission to interfere with their lives. I'm going because my friend invited me a long time ago. I just think I need a little rest. I promise I'll be home early. It all sounds polite and mature, but deep down, it often comes from a fear of being disagreed with. And controlling people are extremely good at noticing that. They don't even need to force you directly, because those explanations already make them feel like they have the right to judge your decisions. I used to be that kind of person. Every time I wanted to do something for myself, I would prepare a long list of reasons just so other people would accept it. I thought that was respect, but in reality, I was asking for permission to live my own life. Until one day, I simply said, I'm going. No extra explanation, no apology, no justification. The silence afterward made me incredibly uncomfortable, but it was also the moment I realized something important. Mature people don't need to turn every personal decision into a courtroom where they have to defend themselves just to live the way they want. One of the most subtle forms of control is making you live around their moods. They don't need to yell or get angry. All they have to do is become a little colder, stay silent longer than usual, or let out an irritated sigh, and you immediately start feeling anxious. You begin wondering what you did wrong, replaying every word and every small action in your head just to figure out where the problem started. And before you realize it, you're chasing their emotions. You try to cheer them up, fix the atmosphere, repair something you don't even fully understand yourself. The frightening part is that once someone realizes their mood can affect your emotional state, silence becomes an incredibly powerful tool of control. I used to spend hours trying to pull someone out of their coldness. I would joke around constantly, check on them, and change my own attitude just to get a softer reaction in return. But one day, I stopped. When they went silent, I simply said, "If you want to talk, I'm here." And then I went back to what I was doing. No overthinking, no chasing, no longer making myself responsible for their emotions. And strangely enough, things slowly became calmer. Because when you stop feeding tension with your fear, it no longer has enough power to control you. Many people have a very dangerous habit, yet they mistake it for closeness in a relationship. They constantly ask for someone else's opinion about every decision in their life. Not because they truly need advice, but because they're afraid of the reaction they might face if they make a decision on their own without checking first. They ask where they should go, who they should meet, what job they should take, how they should spend their money. Even deeply personal choices somehow need approval before they can feel at ease. And over time, the other person becomes used to being involved in every decision. They slowly begin to believe they have the right to participate, to judge, even to decide for you. The scary part is that you start believing it too. You forget that some things are meant to belong only to your own life. I used to be like that. Before every choice, I felt like I should ask first so the other person wouldn't get upset. I thought it was respect, but in reality, it was fear of disapproval, until I started making small decisions on my own without announcing them beforehand. At first, they were uncomfortable and kept asking why I had changed. But I calmly explained that not everything needs to become a group decision. And that was the first time I truly understood that maturity is not about constantly making other people feel like they have control over your life. Maturity is knowing who that life actually belongs to. What keeps you trapped in a controlling relationship is sometimes not fear, but the guilt of disappointing someone. You're not truly afraid of their anger. You're afraid of their silence, afraid of the cold distance that appears every time you choose what you really want. And little by little, you begin to confuse their disappointment with the idea that you must have done something wrong. That's why so many people give up their own choices just to keep the atmosphere peaceful. I used to be like that. One time, I made a very important decision about my future. When I told the other person, they simply stayed silent and looked at me with obvious disapproval. In the past, I would have changed my mind immediately just to make that feeling disappear. But that time, I didn't. I still felt uncomfortable, still felt the pressure, but I kept my decision. And then I realized that nothing actually fell apart. The relationship continued. Life moved on. The only thing that disappeared was the belief that someone else's emotions should determine how I live my life. There's something many people don't realize until they truly begin to change. Controlling people don't actually have as much power as you think they do. The thing they have been relying on all along is your need for approval. As long as you're afraid of disappointing them, afraid of their silence, their coldness, or their disapproval, they will always have a way to influence your choices. But the moment you start living differently, everything begins to change too. Not because they suddenly become a different person, but because you no longer react the way you used to. I used to believe I had to keep everyone happy for a relationship to stay peaceful. But the more I tried to please others, the more I lost myself. Until I finally understood that maturity is not about living in a way that gains acceptance everywhere you go. Maturity is being willing to accept that some people will not be happy with your choices, and that's completely okay. You don't need to become cold or emotionless. You can still love people, still be kind, but no longer allow their emotions to control your life, because in the end, this life belongs to you. And at some point, you have to stop asking for permission just to live it the way you truly want. If today you're still living with the feeling that you have to carefully watch every word and every decision just to avoid upsetting someone, remember this: that is not peace. Real peace does not come from constantly keeping other people satisfied. It comes from the feeling that you are no longer betraying yourself. At first, you may feel guilty when you begin to change. You may feel uncomfortable when you stop over-explaining, when you stop chasing other people's moods, or when you finally keep your decision even though someone is disappointed by it. But that is the feeling of someone learning how to live honestly with themselves after spending far too long living for approval. And little by little, you will begin to feel lighter. You will no longer wake up anxious about whether someone else is in a good mood before deciding how you should feel. You will no longer need permission just to be yourself. And the most beautiful part is that you don't have to become a different person to achieve that. You simply have to stop giving other people control over your life, little by little, every single day. And one day, you'll suddenly realize that somewhere along the way, you found your way back to yourself again. Some people spend their entire lives under control without ever realizing it. Not because they are weak, but because they've become so used to putting other people's emotions above their own for far too long. They're used to asking for permission before making choices, used to feeling guilty whenever someone is disappointed, used to shrinking themselves just to keep peace in a relationship. But eventually, there comes a moment when you have to ask yourself one very simple question. If you don't even have the right to decide how to live your own life, then who are you really living for? Other people may not like your choices. They may become distant, disappointed, or try to make you doubt yourself. But that does not mean you are wrong. Sometimes maturity means accepting that not everyone will be happy with the real version of you. And that is no longer your responsibility. You don't need to defeat anyone. You don't need to prove that you're right. You just need to be calm enough to live your own life without fearing other people's reactions. Because once you've experienced real freedom, even just once, you will never want to go back to those days of asking for permission simply to be yourself again. And one day, you'll realize that the thing exhausting you the most was never the controlling person. It was the constant pressure to keep editing yourself just to keep other people happy. You speak a little less to avoid being judged. You give up certain desires to avoid disappointed looks. You make yourself smaller just to keep the peace. But the more you live that way, the further you drift from who you really are. The saddest part is that many people become so used to this feeling that they mistake it for maturity. They believe sacrificing themselves is the price of maintaining a lasting relationship, but a relationship that makes you feel afraid to be yourself will never truly feel peaceful. And the moment you stop asking for permission to live your own life, everything begins to change. Some people may not like this new version of you. They may say you've become colder, harder to approach, different than before. But the truth is, you haven't become worse. You've simply stopped living in a constant state of trying to please everyone else. Sometimes freedom doesn't come from leaving someone behind. It comes from finally choosing to stand on your own side. And that's when life starts to feel so much lighter. You don't need to become a completely different person to break free from control. You don't have to become strong overnight, and you don't need to turn into someone cold or emotionally detached. Most of the time, it begins with very small changes. One moment where you stop over-explaining. One moment where you keep your decision even though someone is unhappy about it. One moment where you stop rushing to fix someone else's mood just to feel safe yourself. At first, it will feel uncomfortable because you've spent so long living with the need for approval. But the more you do it, the more you'll realize that life feels lighter when you stop placing other people's emotions above your right to live for yourself. And strangely enough, when you begin respecting your own choices, other people slowly learn to respect them too. Not everyone will understand you. Not everyone will like the fact that you've changed. But that is no longer the most important thing. What matters is that you can finally live without constantly worrying about other people's reactions. Some freedoms may seem small, but once you truly experience them, you will never want to return to the days of asking for permission just to be yourself again.